Hey guys, Heidi Priebe here. Today I wanted to clarify something that I think comes up as a question quite a bit in the minds of people who are interacting with people who have an anxious attachment strategy. This is kind of a conversational or particularly a conflict pitfall that I see specifically anxious and avoidant types falling into very, very often. So when we look at both sides of the attachment spectrum, we have anxious on one side, which is more emotionally organized. So their worldview, their understanding of how the world works is organized more through the lens of their personal feelings than it is through the lens of temporal order. So they're more inclined, especially when their attachment system is triggered and they're dealing with an interpersonal situation, to rely on how they feel to tell them the truth about what's happening, versus those on the avoidant side of the spectrum rely more on temporal order than on their inner emotional world. So they're more likely to try to understand a situation through the lens of what concretely caused what to happen, rather than which emotions are impacting my experience of this situation and how can I communicate and work through those as a means of resolving the situation. So this trap that often anxious and avoidant types in particular will fall into when they get into conflict is that the anxiously attached person will be trying desperately to communicate how they feel because they believe that the way they feel is communicating an important truth about the situation at hand. And the avoidant person will get really stuck on the temporal order of things if there are incongruencies in what the anxiously attached person is saying. And usually there are, because an attachment strategy that is inherent to the anxious style is to exaggerate their emotion and their inner experience if they feel as though it's not being seen and understood by the other person. So when you have an anxious attachment strategy and you have a feeling in your body and you do not know how to get rid of it on your own, the number one thing that every single cell in your body is telling you to do is to get someone else to understand the way that you are feeling so they can help you to stop feeling that way. Or through some sort of interaction, even a negative one, even something like a fight or an argument, which at least gives you focused, intense personal attention, it will help your arousal come down if you can only get the other person to see the pain that you are currently in. So the important thing to keep in mind here is that in the mind of the anxiously attached person, particularly when their attachment system is very activated and online, the most important thing to them is communicating their emotion. The facts of the matter are far less important and in their minds don't really matter as much. So let's say the anxiously attached person had a difficult day at work and they felt insulted by something that someone said. And let's say they come home and tell their partner and they don't really get the reaction they were expecting out of their partner. They thought that they would receive a lot of focused empathy and attention, but instead maybe their partner went, that wouldn't bother me that much. I think you should just brush it off. Now, the important thing here is that the anxiously attached person could be in a triggered state where they are feeling a lot of intensity in their body. And they believe that if you only understood how they were feeling, then you would give them the co-regulation they need. So they might distort the facts of what happened in order to accurately convey the emotion that is present in them. So they might think, okay, let me think of what would have happened that would have made you feel this way. And they might present the situation as though that were what actually happened, but not because they are consciously trying to mislead you for any logical reason. They're not trying to get you to have false thoughts. Their motivation is to try to get you to understand the feeling that they're having. And distorting the facts of the situation is just one means, one possible way of getting you to understand the feeling, which in their mind is the absolute most important thing that must be communicated. The facts can be fudged so that the truth, which is their emotional experience, which, by the way, is true. The emotional experience that they are trying to communicate feels so true for them because it actually is happening. Like it's a state that they are currently embodying inside of their physical form, right? So they're not lying about their feelings, and that's important to remember. But they might be exaggerating or fudging what happened in order to elicit what they believe is a parallel feeling in you. So in order to get you to understand and grasp the truth of what they are currently feeling, which to them feels like the absolute most important thing to communicate. Now, when you have an anxious partner with a more avoidant partner. And this can also happen with a secure partner, but it's a lot more likely to happen with an avoidant partner. The avoidant partner is more likely to get really stuck on trying to figure out any incongruencies in the story, because in the avoidant mind, what they often do to help themselves change their feelings is understand the sequence of events that led up to them feeling that way, and then try to unpack what they might be misunderstanding or what they might be missing about someone else's perspective that allows them to kind of dismiss that feeling inside of themselves by understanding the context in which it developed. But when the avoidant person attempts to unpack or to understand the temporal order of their anxious partner's series of events that they have presented, if the anxious party is exaggerating or there are holes in their story, which often there will be if they are very triggered and they are kind of haphazardly conveying a situation with a fair bit of exaggeration in tow, the avoidant person is going to get really stuck on, well, why would they say that? Or why would they do that? Or I thought you said this. And the anxious person will read that as the avoidant person invalidating their feeling. But really, what the avoidant person is doing is trying to understand what led to their feeling, and they're getting stuck and confused in the process because there are holes in the story. And again, the anxious person is likely to interpret this as, you are telling me that I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling, you're telling me my feelings are wrong, you're not validating me, you're not acknowledging me. Well, on the avoidant side of things, they're seeing it as, I'm trying to understand the scenario so that I understand kind of what led to this. But again, because these two approach emotions differently and approach the understanding of emotions differently, there is this kind of death spiral that they can get caught in this process. So, of course, there are steps that can be taken from both sides here. So the person using an anxious attachment strategy has a growth opportunity in learning to understand the cause of their emotions. So often, those using an anxious strategy feel their emotions extremely intensely, but often omit the sequence of events, particularly their role in the sequence of events that led to them ultimately feeling that way. And so the responsibility that needs to be taken here, of course, is for the anxiously attached person to start considering context more when it comes to how they feel. And that is an imperative part of the growth process if you are looking to heal your attachment style as someone using an anxious strategy. But if you are using an avoidant strategy and you are attempting to understand why these fights keep happening over and over and over again, and why these exaggerations keep happening when it would make more sense in your mind if your partner would just tell you what happened so you could help them understand the situation and you could find the way out of it together, what you need to understand is that the story is irrelevant to someone using an anxious attachment strategy who is exaggerating. The story is nothing more than a means of explaining and trying to get you to see the way that they're feeling and their need for comfort. So if you can ignore the story and focus only on the feeling and ask them more questions about what they're feeling, what they're going through, what they need, that is a very likely way to circumnavigate a lot of arguing and a lot of disharmony. Now, I'm not suggesting that you cater to someone's anxious attachment strategy. I suggest that if you are going to engage in this way, you ask them to kind of meet you in the middle by asking directly, how are you feeling? The story to me doesn't matter as much, but if there's something you're trying to communicate to me about how you're feeling, I want you to tell me directly so that we can work with that. A lot of the time, when an anxious attachment strategy is active in someone, they will be trying to elicit the way they want you to feel without directly telling you. So they might tell you a very dramatic story and kind of expect you to have a certain response. And that bypasses the work of them showing up, naming their emotions, and communicating them directly, which is the secure response. So the best way to handle this situation is to invite them into that secure conversation. Hey, it seems like you are experiencing a really strong emotion right now. Is that something that you wanted to talk to me about? If so, I'm here. And often there can be this very nice middle ground where those using avoidant attachment strategies tend to have a pretty good grasp on how a given sequence of events comes together in order to produce a certain outcome, and the person using an anxious attachment strategy tends to have a more somatic and embodied experience of their emotions. So in an ideal world, these two could actually contribute kind of missing pieces of a puzzle in conversation if they're able to meet in that secure place rather than getting fixated on what they are both prone to get fixated on. So the person using an anxious attachment strategy is prone to attempting to elicit a certain reaction in someone else without directly saying how they're feeling and what they need. And people using avoidant strategies are more prone to fixating on the details of what happened and trying to figure out the specific sequence of events rather than acknowledging that what actually needs to get dealt with in this moment, what is present in this moment, is a surplus of emotion. And that surplus of emotion in someone else is not always solved by understanding the sequence of events the way that it might be for them. So, to meet in the middle here, both people have to be willing to abandon their strategy to an extent and work together to communicate in a new way. And this ended up being way more of a conflict resolution video than I expected it to be. But the point I'm trying to make here is that there is a function to the anxious attachment strategy of emphasizing and exaggerating what happened, and in some cases, lying about what happened, but it's not because they're attempting to mislead you about the facts. What it is that when that anxious attachment strategy is triggered, in their minds, the facts only serve as supporting evidence to what they're feeling. And because they are sure, without a shadow of a doubt about what they're feeling, to them it doesn't really matter when they're activated if the facts get fudged, because the end goal is just communicating that emotion. And if they can communicate that emotion accurately through distorting the facts a little bit, mission accomplished. Right? So there is a purpose to this exaggeration. Their end goal is not misleading you or distorting you about what happened. Their end goal is expressing and getting you to understand how they feel. And that, at the end of the day, is going to be what stops the distortions of events. If you can not focus on those and you can only focus in on the feeling and invite them to meet you in that secure place where both emotions are clearly expressed and also facts, logic, and the sequence of events is displayed factually. And in order to give them the safety to meet you there, you have to be willing to not dismiss the way they're feeling based on the situation at hand. So if they tell you the situation for what it is and you think they're having an overreaction, which you might, a non-helpful thing to do is to dismiss the way that they're feeling and communicate that you believe it's an overreaction. That is going to get you right back into that pattern of distorting the sequence of events so that in their eyes they have given you a sequence of events that you would see as valid relative to the way that they're feeling. If you want to meet in that secure middle ground as a more avoidant-leaning partner with an anxious partner, you have to be willing to take their feelings at face value. And on the flip side, they have to be willing to show up honestly and communicate what actually happened honestly. And that is how you eventually arrive in that middle ground where both true emotional information and true cognitive information are being integrated. And this is a little bit pie in the sky if you are at the beginning of your attachment healing journey, but this is a really great place you can get to interpersonally if both partners are willing to be aware of and lay down their attachment strategies when needed in order to get to a place where both people understand each other and are working together to solve problems instead of working against each other and keeping that cycle going forever. All right, that is all I have to say for today on that topic. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts and experiences are in this area. I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you back here again really soon.